Hello. So this is a screencast to accompany week 10. Um, I'm going to keep this screencast quite technical and just cover what we've done. We're transitioning from a sub-part of the module where we've been looking at server architectures, if you like, web architectures as they relate to setting up web servers, through to web architectures for application development. Specifically, last week we looked at the MVC pattern, Model View Controller. This week we're going to look at MVC as it's materialised into an actual framework, the Groovy on Grails framework. This session is going to be quite practical, and if you can make it the lectures this week, it's going to be well worthwhile. What's going to happen is we're going to take baby steps, and I'm going to walk you through the entire process of setting up a new application that we're then going to improve over the coming weeks. A lot of this might seem complex or might seem new. The real skill here is just being organised, yeah? So if you can make it to the lectures, follow the steps, ask questions and take notes, you'll be fine. There's nothing particularly deep in all this, it's just a matter of taking some notes and organising them to make sure that you've got a repeatable procedure. So that there's nothing particularly complicated here, it's just there's some new stuff and you need to be organised in your approach to consuming that information. So I'm going to skip through the waffly bits of the lecture. We're going to base our work for the next few weeks around a case study, and we're going to use e-registration for that. The reason for that is it's obviously an application that we can all understand. Yeah, we already have a register, and we're going to think about how we might be able to turn that into some kind of web application. You know, we all understand what a room is and what a register is and attendance, so this is useful for us because we don't have to do lots of analysis to get a shared perspective on it. The other thing about this as an application is that it allows us a little bit later on in the module to think about how we connect web applications to novel devices like RFID readers. So this leads into web services and RESTful web services for connecting to devices like card readers, which might be useful for us as well. So it gives us an interesting in a little bit further down in the module. There's a new VMware image that you need to copy for this lecture that has all the right tools installed on it. I don't propose to put you all through the setting up a VM thing again. You've done your time on that, so I'll point you at an image that you can copy that's got all the tools set up. In terms of building this new web application, we could just dive in there and start creating it in folders, but one of the things that gives students a bit of trouble when they get out there in placement year is, all sound projects start with configuration management, as I've said there, and it's something that sometimes it can be a bit tricky to get your head around. So what we're going to do is we're going to start as we mean to go on, and this project we're going to set up configuration management for so that you understand how it works and that you're familiar with it by the time you encounter it next year. We're going to use GitHub for that. Here's GitHub, here's it logged on with my Hallam Uni credentials. You need to create yourself an account on here. I suggest that you use your student code as a username and your student email address as a contact. If you want to set up a different GitHub account with your personal email address, that's fine, but I think it's worth keeping a separate one for your uni work. Next semester there'll be an assessment, and part of that assessment will be setting up a Git project and checking a web application into that project. So I would really like for you to be able to develop a few applications in here that you could almost use as part of a portfolio piece. The reason for doing this instructor-led part of the course, we didn't do this last year, is that hopefully as we build this e-registration app, if you choose to, you can grow it into a portfolio piece that you'd be proud to point somebody at. If somebody said, "Oh, have you got a project on GitHub that I can look at?" Just by doing the module, hopefully you'll come out of it, and one of the outcomes will be a thing that you can point to somebody and say, "This is my work." You'll have the case study that we're doing in class, and then you'll have a project which is going to form an assessment next semester. So that's the thinking behind this. So there are a few things that we need to just set up before we get into the meat of using Git. Obviously, if we're using it to check changes to our code in, the last thing we want is to be prompted all the time for our username and password, because it could become really quite annoying. Git allows us to use something called public key cryptography, so instead of using username and password, we can use a certificate to authenticate ourselves with the server. This just requires a little bit of extra setup at the start, but it'll save us a lot of pain in the end. I've already done that step here, but I will talk you through it in the lecture. Basically, it involves logging in as what will be a student user on the VM and running a command called SSH keygen. So that's the command I've run there. I'm going to cancel this because I already have a key. When you run SSH keygen, it generates a symmetric key pair in this directory here. I can show you the contents of that folder. And in particular, the file which we're interested in both these files. This is the two halves of my key. The .pub file is the public half, so I can share that with you all. And what you'll do is exactly what I've done here. Just cat it to the screen and then paste it or copy it. And then if you click on the admin account section, there's an SSH keys. You can click add an SSH key, you'll give it a name and then paste that key in there. I've already done that. This key here, ACESII at crick, is this key. So it won't let me, I could do it. ACESII at crick. If I do it now, it should tell me that key's already in use. Yeah, key is already in use and it's this key. You just need to go through that process and I'll explain to you why that is in the lecture. And make sure everybody's done it, so you'll all have it set up. It'll be fine. So, back to what we're doing here. Git is a set of tools for managing your source files. Okay, everything we're doing in this particular part of the course is really about tools to make our life easier developing web applications. And Git has a lot of subcommands, and the ones particularly we're going to be using here are git clone, branch, checkout, commit, and push. So, the first thing we're going to need to do is to set up a new project at Git. It might seem strange that when we're developing a web application, the first thing that we're going to do, is to set up a repository on Git. But as I said, all sound projects begin with configuration management, not just diving in there and creating our application. So the way we do this is we go to GitHub homepage and you'll see there's this new repository link. So set up a new project called eRegister. eRegister. Okay. And created that. And electronic. You can see I've done a practice run. An electronic attendance register. It's a public repository, that's important. Anybody can see this, which interesting as part of a portfolio piece. We want to initialize this project, this repository, with a README, and the particular type of project is Grails. Okay, so let's just recap. Our repository name is eRegister. We've given it a description. It's public, and we're going to initialize it with a Grails gitignore and a README file. Okay, so you can see it's come back and it's created a project with these two files, .gitignore and a README file. This first line is how you can check that code out. You can download it in a zip file. You can check it out using HTTP, in which case you'll be prompted for your username and password whenever you want to send any changes, or you can use SSH, and this is the reason that we've just set up our public key, so that we can use this particular method for cloning the project. So we copy that and we go back to our home directory and we type git clone and then we paste in that particular URI. Okay. You can see I now have a directory, eRegister. I cd to eRegister, and you can see the README file. You remember at the start I said files beginning with dot are hidden, so if I do ls-la, which is a long listing of all files,
here's the gitignore file, or .gitignore file. This is basically just telling Git which files it shouldn't track by default. We don't want to be uploading temporary files and library files to Git, so this is just a hint for Git about what it shouldn't be tracking. I can cat the README file. Nothing in it particularly, apart from our description. The README is automatically shown on the project homepage, so one of the things that we're going to need to do in a little while is to actually put something a bit more meaningful in here. But this is good. We've set up a project at Git and we've cloned it to our local disk. Git uses something called branching. Branching is a way of managing multiple streams of development. So if I want to have a release that's stable, isn't being changed apart from bug fixes, I can do that at the same time that I have development work going on, and my development changes won't interfere with my release branch, if you like. I don't particularly wish to go too deeply into configuration management. There are some really good web articles for branching strategies with Git, which I will point you at, worth a read if you're sufficiently interested. For our purposes here, we're going to work with 3 branches: a development branch, a lectures branch, and a release branch. Master is the branch that GitHub creates by default. You'll see here we've got a branch indicator that tells us what branch we're currently looking at, and currently there's only a master branch in there. I'll talk through this in the lecture. What I'm trying to indicate here is that we're going to work on the lectures branch in class, and we might commit some changes, and at the end of this lecture we'll arrive at a particular point where we might make a release onto a release branch, and what I'd like you to do at the end of this lecture is to leave the work you've done intact so that we can build on it next week. If at the end of the lecture you want to be able to play with what we've done, you want to be able to make your own changes to it, what I'm suggesting here is that you might create a branch called Student Experiment that you could then build on, and all your changes will be isolated to your experimentation branch, which means that next week when we come back to lectures you can go back to your lectures branch and we can build on where we left things at the end of this week, and you can follow. Next week we'll build naturally on the work we've done this week, so you're still able to actually take this off and do interesting things and mess around with the application and save your changes, and it won't interfere with week on week what we're doing in class. But that's what I'm trying to depict here, the idea that on our lectures branch I want you to keep this pristine and be exactly what we're doing in class, but you shouldn't feel that doesn't mean that you can in your own time branch the end of lecture 10 and do your own things, practice, add your own controllers, add your own domain classes, whatever you want to do. Just make sure that it doesn't interfere with this lectures branch, because otherwise it's going to really throw you next week. So that's the purpose of this particular branching strategy. This develop and release branch, particularly with feature branches, is a pretty common way of using Git. So what we want to do before we actually get into the business of setting up our project is set up these branches. Let's just start. So I'm inside my project directory. All I've got is a readme and a gitignore file. The first thing I'm going to do then is to use the git branch command, which creates a new branch. And I'm going to create a development branch. That creates a branch locally only. I'd like these branches to be tracked by a remote repository. I'd like these branches to appear on GitHub itself. Specifically, I want them to appear in this drop-down. So what I've got to do is to use this git push. Origin is the name for the remote branch, essentially, yeah, where we got the file from originally. Git push origin develop. Now, if I'd use the HTTP checkout right now, I'd be prompted for my username and password. Because I've set up SSH, the public key is being exchanged, and Git behind the scenes is authenticating me, so it's saving me having to type my username and password all the time. You can see it's come back and said, oh, here's a new tracked branch called develop. If I go to the web app and refresh this, I'll see my development branch listed here as well. Git's got a really neat feature which we'll use quite a bit.
here are my branches, master and develop, and you can see this is the first commit. The commit I've just, when I created the project, this commit was created basically. So that's my development branch. I want a lectures and a release branch. Git branch lectures. Git push origin lectures. And git branch release. Git push origin release. Okay. This is updated periodically, so sometimes changes might not be reflected. There we go. Right away, so master, develop, lectures, release. You can see all our branches, and if I go back to the code tab, you'll see here are my branches. Okay. So we've set up our branching strategy. We've still not created an application. This is all pre-work. MVC frameworks are basically tool architectures. They give you a series of tools which have, if you remember last week I talked quite a lot about convention over configuration. The idea that tools should do the right thing by default without you having to specify lots of parameters. It's definitely the case here. We can create new applications, we can create domain classes, and we can create controllers. We want the tool to do the right thing, unless we want to do something a little bit special, in which case there are options to override them. But this idea that a tool should just do the right thing, if at all possible, is very common. So Cake, the PHP framework, or Ruby on Rails, they all have this idea of tools which should have the right defaults to do useful tasks for you. And the idea is to try and take the legwork out of building applications so that you can focus on the app that you're building rather than all the infrastructure that comes with it. So if you wanted to create a new application using Grails, here's the command for it, Grails create app. Here's the command for creating new domain classes in our object model, and here's the controller create command. So we want to create our project properly now. We've set up the infrastructure, we've set up the configuration management directory. If we were to run that create command here, what I'd end up with is a subdirectory called eRegister. That might actually be quite a useful thing to do, because it would give us space at the root of the project to do things like store files. We might store some requirements files here, or notes, or set up scripts, anything. That can be quite useful. But in this case, what I really want is for the root of my eRegister project to be the root of the application itself, the web application. So from my home directory, I have this eRegister project, and what I'm going to do is type Grails create app eRegister. Now the Grails create app command will create a directory and then create the project in that directory. If that directory already exists, it'll just reuse it. So by typing this command, I'm asking Grails to create me an app in this folder here. So it tells me where it's created it, which is in the right directory. I'll go back in there, and you'll see now I've got all these extra folders created: an application.properties file, a Grails app folder, a lib folder, scripts, source, test, and web app. And remember, readme was there from before. Just type the git branch command here. This lists all the branches and tells me which one I'm on currently. I'd like to actually do my work here on the development branch. So the command to switch branches is git checkout develop, and it tells me it's switched to branch develop. I've not actually added any of these files that have just been generated to Git yet, so I'm not tracking these from a configuration management perspective. Excuse me a second. Okay. So Git doesn't know anything about these files that I've just created. Here's a quick representation of the project structure. Obviously for you this should be right. For me, I'm working under a user called ACESII. going back to the tooling thing and intelligent defaults, there's a principle that I'm going to talk about in the coming weeks called DRY, don't repeat yourself. All these components are needed for an enterprise web application, one way or another. Things like IA10 files. So IA10 is the abbreviation for internationalization. You'll see on your browser that you can change the locale, so you can change from British English to French, for example. We'd like our web apps to be able to switch their text when somebody does that. It's sensible that all that infrastructure of your web app should be there by default. The framework provides it. It would be an immense pain if you had to go through and set up these for every single project. So we use MVC frameworks like Grails and Cake and Rails because they give us all these defaults. When we type that create project command, or create app in the case of Grails, it's setting all these folders up for us. It's giving us a whole template into which we can inject our web application. Again, freeing us up to think about the application itself rather than at the outset thinking about internationalization or where to put our CSS files, giving ourselves a default CSS file. Over here we've got information about data sources. So you can see that we've got intelligent defaults for our project. Okay, this is roughly the project structure, and obviously this is the operating system part of the file system. So quick recap, we created a project at GitHub and then we cloned it to our local disk. Then we set up some branches, and then we used the Grails create app project to generate a lot of files. At this point, Git doesn't know anything about all those files we've generated, so the first thing we want to do, we'd like to create a really clean baseline, which is our application with no fluff, just as it was generated. So the first thing we have to do is to tell Git about those files that we've just generated. So I'm in the eRegister directory. Here are all the files that have been generated. I'm just going to say git add star. Remember to check that you're on the develop branch. So git branch gives us an asterisk at the side of the branch that we're currently on. So asterisk develop, that's right. If I wasn't on the right branch, I'd type git space checkout space develop. As it is, I'm right, so I'm going to say git add star. This tells Git to add everything in this directory. It'll recurse into directories, so this is a blunderbuss approach. Just make sure you add everything in this directory. Git is now tracking these files, and I want to commit this I want to say this is something that's worth storing. The application as it was in a pristine state before I'd started messing around with it. So I'm going to commit this. The command is git commit -a -m all files, and I'm going to give you a message that I want you to store against this commit. So initial commit after app generation. If you were going to use this as a part of a portfolio, if an interviewer were to say to you, have you ever done a web application? And you said, yeah, I've got a GitHub account. One of the things they're going to do is to look at your commit messages. Yeah, it's really tempting to say git commit -a -m updated as your commit message. Git forces you to have an update message. Don't do it. It looks really horrible, and if somebody does come to look at your repository, they're going to think you're one of those people who doesn't really give good commit messages. Your commit log should read like a sensible log of the changes that have been made. So do try and put some thought into these. This is what's going to give meaning to other people trying to understand the changes that you've made to your repository, so it is worth actually giving proper commit messages and not just pithy little one-liners or one-word commit messages. When I run that command, Git tells me about all the changes it's made. Now, this is something that foxes people a little bit about Git and about distributed version management systems. These changes have only been committed locally, so GitHub doesn't know anything about these changes yet. They're only stored in my local repository. I can roll them back, I can look at what commits have been made locally, but the real advantage of using something like Git is our ability to push changes up to the public repository. You can see Git's actually listed every file that's been added in this release, 52 of them. you can see here are my internationalized files, my property files basically for displaying web applications for different locales, images and CSS. When you get down to the meat of it, actually, in terms of code files, there aren't really that many. That's the setup file. Here are some HTML templates. Here's some CSS. Yeah, the rest is fluff. So I've committed it locally. I need to push this up to GitHub now. I'll just go quickly to the project page and refresh it. Yep, okay, so there's nothing particularly interesting there. I type git push. It comes back and it tells me what's happened. The development branch has moved, and it's basically a commit on the development branch. If I reload here, oh, I need to switch branches. Develop. You can see that I've got a web app and a Grails app in here now. My application.properties file is visible. If I go to the network page, sorry, if I can click. It's difficult to see, but you can just see our original 3 branches are here, still stuck at the project creation commit, and my development branch has now moved on 1 commit, and is 1 commit ahead, with the message that I gave, initial commit after app generation. So I've pushed my changes up to GitHub now. This is largely the meat that we're going to do in the lecture. We're not going to do very much beyond this. We're going to do a couple of token changes just to show what can be done. The project README file, I'm going to use VI. You might like to use gedit in class. You get that slightly nicer editor. So this is a markdown file, .md. Markdown gives you just some. It's basically a wiki markup language. I'm going to just. When people go to your project, they'll see the readme.md for the default branch in your project. It's important that you actually populate that readme file with something meaningful if you intend to let people see this project, as a portfolio piece. I'm not saying you should write reams and reams, but it will be useful to have some text that honestly explains what you're doing here. So can't type anymore. If I put an asterisk in front of that. Okay. Etc. etc. You should try and make this a little bit meaningful and semi-interesting so that anybody who comes along gets an idea of what the project is, what it does. You can have a look around GitHub. There are some really good projects in there that should give you an idea, and I bet that if you were to search for GitHub portfolio project, you will see some really good examples of students who are trying to basically present their work as a portfolio piece. So, like any other file that's been tracked by GitHub, the README is changed locally. I need to commit it and push it. Git commit -a -n updated README file. So I've committed my changes locally, and I'd like to send those changes up to GitHub. Git push. Switch to the develop branch. Okay, so you can see here's my new e-register file. The asterisk at the beginning of a line turns it into a bulleted list. You can read the markdown documentation for all the different ways you can format text. You can see on the develop branch I've got 3 commits. I can click on this and it'll give me a list of all the changes. So initial commit after app generation, updated README file. Every time we make a commit and push it, it's listed here. We can see what changes have been made, so that's quite useful. While I'm here, I'll click on admin and I will change default branch to be develop. So anybody who comes along, they're going to see the README file from my development branch. Hopefully I'll click on this now, hit branch develop, and you can see the README. That's good. So, final thing to do. If I Grails command, run app. I type Grails run app. So this is the thing, really, this has all been building to. Because it's the first time I'm running Grails here, it's come back and asked if I want to send usage stats. So I'm going to say no to that. It's the first time I've run this app under this username, so Grails has to go away and download all the dependencies. It should be much quicker after this, but the first time through it's going to take a little while. Okay, it's downloaded the dependencies, it's actually building the app now. Okay, it's come back and said it's running the application, and it said browse to this URL to see the app. So I go to my web browser, paste the URL in, and what I get back is a default page that shows me all the plugins which have been installed and some information about the application, as well as a default controller. Now this, it feels like we've gone through a lot to get to this point. But what you need to remember is that we've gone from having nothing to a web application that is fully internationalized. Yeah, we could set this up with French and English and German and Spanish. It's got a database connection, so we're ready to start creating a domain app, and it's fully ready to start receiving MVC components. So, and this has been really drawn out. We've taken it quite slowly, but what we've got here is a functional web application. Obviously, you wouldn't want your front page to be like this, really. So, one of the things about all these frameworks is they want to allow you to change things dynamically. So if I grab a new tab, which is Shift-Control-T, somebody was asking me about this recently. Excuse me. My local setup's a little bit different to yours, so I have to jump through a hoop to get to the ACESII user. Here's my e-register project. This is it running, and I'm going to change it dynamically. If I very quickly pop back here, in terms of the project structure, all the work happens inside this Grails app folder, and specifically you can see controllers, domain, view. So this is model, controller, and view. You'll find little terminology differences in different places. If you look at Django, Django doesn't use MVC as terminology, but the concepts are the same. So Django is the Python web development framework. So sometimes you'll have to do a bit of terminology mapping with different frameworks, but the same pattern keeps cropping up again and again. If we wanted to change this page, which is not really very clean, is it? The odds are we're going to look in the view folder. So if we cd to Grails app views, we can see an index.gsp page. And this is it. This is the page which is generating, this. You can see, so we've got a heading 1 application status there, and application status. Really, we want rid of all this. It's a useful front page, but it's not really what we want, is it? So let's change the title to the e-register. And let's just get rid of all this. And we'll put in here a paragraph text. Okay, so I've changed the index.gsp, and if I refresh this now, okay. Interestingly, if we look at this page, here's a page. So where's all that wraparound header coming from? That's quite interesting, isn't it? You'll notice there's one special thing about this, apart from the fact that the file extension is .gsp. So that's a Groovy server page. We've got this extra meta tag here, and the name is layout and the content is main. You might have guessed, if we look under the views, there's a layouts folder and there's a main there. This is where the template essentially that's wrapped around our particular view comes from. So you can see in here we've got a load of CSS stuff, and somewhere there's an icon for the site. This is the images directory being added, and here we're including a mobile CSS. So one of the things that we get from frameworks is a load of free things. If you think, we'll look at ways of attacking websites and things like SQL injection and just general injection attacks. Frameworks are often hardened against that kind of attack, and you get that for free. You have to be careful how you use it, but you're gaining a lot from writing the application from the ground up yourself. Here you can see that Grails is giving us some different style sheets for looking at your website on mobile devices or tablets. So you're getting lots for free here. We've got a couple of custom tags. This is to do with laying out resources for when you include various JavaScript libraries. We'll look at that next week. Here's the bit which includes the logo. Yeah, so we don't really want that in our app. And then we've got a special tag which says now lay out the body. So this is what causes the page that we were just looking at to be rendered, the actual content from that page. Let's get rid of the footer as well. And these two special things, this tag to layout application resources, we'll leave those in there because they're to do with the framework. But this is the place where we can edit all our template code, basically. Templates which are common to all our pages in the application. Oops, let's go there, sorry. Okay, so we've edited the template that slots around our page, and we've edited the page itself, or the page content itself. If I reload this now, we're back to a very plain old page, which isn't very exciting, but it's what we need for our application. So that's going to be our second commit, basically. So I type git status, which will tell us what changes have been made. It tells us 2 files have been modified. I'm going to commit them. Git commit -a -n dated index and template files to strip out Grails defaults, and I'm going to push that. If I go over to GitHub, 4 commits, here we go, updated index and template files. Okay, so that's good, committed. One last thing then. I'd like to make a release. So we have been. If I go back to the network here, you can see our development branch here. Here are my 3 commits. I'd like to be able to. Actually, this should be on the lectures branch really, rather than the development branch. So let's fix that first. I'm going to check out the lectures branch. Git check out lectures. Git merge develop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge all the changes from the development branch onto the lectures branch. Unable to read current working directory. Okay, quite sure what the problem was there. That's merge develop onto release. Git push. If I refresh this now, as I said earlier on, this is only updated periodically, so you can't expect changes to immediately come back here. But you can see develop and lectures branches are now at the same place. Master is still set up here, and this is the release branch. So what I want to do is I want to repeat that process for my release branch. I want release to be this project as it was at the end of this lecture. Git checkout release, git merge lectures, git push. Okay. So you can see now all these 3 branches are at the same commit point. If I wanted to mess around with these files between now and next week's lecture, I'd like these files to stay as they are, otherwise you're going to get confused in class. But what I might do is to say git branch iidev git push origin iidev okay, git checkout iidev. Right, I'm in my own little branch that I've created coming off the release branch right now, and what I'm going to say is Grails app views index. Okay. Oh, look at that! That was a bug there. That should have been a closing fee. Yeah. If you've been scooting off ahead and reading the Grails documentation, you could say Grails create controller home. Okay. I've created a new controller there called home. Ooh, I should get status. And I'm going to add those. It's created a new folder called Grails app controllers and a test folder. I'm going to say git commit updated index and added home controller. This is all stuff we're going to look at next week, so you don't need to worry about this, but just I want to illustrate for you how this can work. So I've made some changes to the index file and I've created a new controller, which might just be because I'm into this as a student and I want to mess about with this application. I've committed those changes on a branch called iidev. If I refresh this now, you'll see that coming off this, there's this little iidev branch here. This is the only place that those changes that I've just made are visible. And I could make further commits on that branch. I could could delete everything, I could do whatever I like, and it would all be entirely private to this branch. The important thing, if I cat Grails app views index, yeah, you'll see those changes, and if I ls Grails app controllers register home controller, that's the control I created. The important thing is that come next Monday or next Wednesday, I could say git checkout lectures. Yeah. If I cat the index view now, it's exactly as it was at the end of the lecture, and there's no. I think there might not even be a controllers folder. There isn't even a controllers folder because that wasn't created at that point. So by switching the branch back to the lectures branch, you can see that we've gone back to this point where none of this work had been done. And I can always, after that lecture, I can always say git checkout iidev, and I'll have my changes back again, and I can carry on working on them. So hopefully this gives you, a flavour for why we use this kind of tool, and I think it's quite useful to be able to illustrate it by having our lectures branch just to keep that code pristine. I know that that's been a lot this week, but as I said, there's nothing particularly complicated. I know it's new to you. You just have to keep at it, practice it until it sinks in. If you make notes, if you record the commands that you're using, and if you ask questions where you're not sure, you can nail this. All right, it's just a matter of keeping going with it. Just make sure there's nothing else I need to talk about. Yeah, that's good. I'll cover the key points in the lecture. If you want to do some reading, the tutorials at grails.org are a great way of getting into this. But remember that we're actually trying to learn about MVC here. The purpose here isn't to turn you into Grails developers. Grails is quite useful for illustrating the concepts, but bear in mind MVC pattern, loose coupling, and separation of concerns. Those are the things that I'm going to be asking you about here. I'm not going to be asking you to tell me about the Grails infrastructure itself. Next week, I'm planning to look at domain classes, so how we actually realise our object model and how that gets translated into database tables. I may, given that it's likely to be the last lecture of the year, we may substitute doing something a little bit more graphical, possibly using Twitter Bootstrap as a bit of fun. We'll see how we got on in the lecture, I guess. Okay, I'll see you all in the week. Thank you very much.